Long time ago, Bongo Village, a small settlement nestled deep within the wild grasslands of northern Ghana, seemed to awaken that morning as if touched by something sacred. The sun rose earlier than usual, and soft breezes carried the scent of wildflowers and the cheerful songs of birds chirping atop thatched palm roofs. Today was the wedding day of Amina Okoro, the only daughter of Merchant Okoro, wealthiest man in the region, and Kofi Mensah, a young man loved by the entire village for his calm demeanor, respectful nature, and intelligence. Their love had blossomed through letters exchanged via a mutual friend. For 2 years, they wrote to each other without missing a single week, sharing dreams, fears, and private thoughts too fragile to tell anyone else. Through every line and word, they slowly realized something profound. They had fallen in love before ever meeting face to face. Their first encounter wasn't particularly dramatic. It was a quiet afternoon under the shade of an old baobab tree at the edge of the village. Amina was handing out medicine to an elderly woman, while Kofi, the newly arrived stranger, stood silently nearby, helping the old lady with her water jug. Their eyes met for only a few seconds, but to Amina there was something familiar, something deeply close in that gaze. In the days that followed, they began speaking more. Sometimes while collecting vegetables for the clinic, sometimes near the village well at dusk. Kofi didn't talk much, but he always listened. He told her how much he loved the letters she wrote, how he had memorized her gentle, thoughtful words. Amina was surprised he remembered her writing so clearly, and gradually she began to believe that fate had truly brought this man to her. They didn't fall in love instantly. It was slower than that. They simply began to feel incomplete without one another. Walks beside the millet fields, shared laughter during rainy afternoons, moments when Kofi would appear out of nowhere just to offer her a wildflower. All of it slowly wove together a love that was simple, warm, and rooted in trust. To Amina, that love felt like a cool stream in the heat of day, quiet but always flowing. She never questioned who the man in front of her truly was. Because love, while it can blind, also helps the heart see more clearly than the eyes ever could. And today she would marry him, the man she believed to be Kofi, the man she believed would bring happiness and peace to the rest of her life. Joy filled every corner of the village and every row of wooden pews inside the church. The old clay-walled chapel, worn but sacred, had been given a fresh coat of red earth and decorated with bright, colorful fabrics. Wooden benches were lined up straight, all facing a simple altar topped with a wooden cross. Every guest arrived dressed in their finest clothes, carrying smiles and blessings. From early morning, the village women had started cooking, preparing fufu and groundnut soup, the region's most beloved wedding dishes. Children ran across the yard, helping collect leaves and decorate the church entrance with garlands made of banana leaves and wildflowers. The air buzzed with celebration. Rich or poor, every villager came together to contribute, because this wasn't just the wedding of two families, but a celebration for the whole community. Everyone loved the couple, those who had always shown love for their people and their village. Inside her home, Amina was being adorned by the village women. Her wedding dress, a soft, pristine batik gown, fit her slender figure gracefully. She smiled gently, her eyes shimmering with nervous excitement. Though she had prepared for this day for a long time, her heart was racing. "I'm about to be someone's wife," she murmured with a dreamy smile. Amina was known for her intelligence and kindness. Raised in a wealthy but strict household, she never acted superior. Villagers loved her not for her status, but for her warmth. She taught the local children to read, helped prepare herbal remedies, and always appeared at the bedside of the sick. At the other end of the village, Kofi was also getting ready. He wore a traditional white agbada with striking gold trim. His friends helped adjust his head wrap and sleeves. He smiled, but his eyes flickered. Most thought it was the normal nervousness of a groom, but for a moment a flicker of tension crossed his face, quickly hidden by the sound of drums announcing that the auspicious hour had arrived. They said Kofi was a gentle soul, quiet but deep. He had returned to the village after years working in the city. No one knew much about his background, only that he claimed his parents lived a simple life in a faraway region. Yet, somehow, he earned the trust of the villagers, and, more surprisingly, the approval of Merchant Okoro himself, a man famously strict when it came to choosing a son-in-law. That trust made everyone believe Kofi was truly deserving. The entire village gathered at the church. The drums played a joyful rhythm. Under the golden sun, a wedding was about to unfold, one that seemed perfect and full of happiness. But none of them knew that within just a few hours, a truth would be revealed, one that would shake the very foundation of everything they believed about the man they were celebrating. At the church, Pastor Kwame was reviewing the Bible and finalizing the necessary rituals. Although this was the grandest wedding the village had seen in years, he maintained a calm demeanor. He had officiated the unions of countless couples, but today something inside him felt unsettled, though he couldn't quite put a finger on why. As sunlight began to spill through the eastern window of the church, a strange figure appeared at the doorway. It was a woman cloaked in a gray robe, her head wrapped tightly in fabric that covered most of her face. Only her eyes, dark and piercing, were visible through the cloth. She walked slowly, not hurried, but carried an invisible weight that caused those seated near the door to instinctively turn and look. She said nothing. No one knew where she came from. She walked directly toward the altar, which remained bare, awaiting the couple. The woman knelt down, pulled out a simple wooden rosary, and began praying in an ancient dialect, one that only the village elders faintly recognized as an old tongue from the eastern regions. Pastor Kwame was surprised by her quiet presence. He stepped forward, intending to greet her, but before he could speak, she turned around and said, in a calm yet commanding voice, "Please, be cautious. Do not let false light blind the truth. This wedding should not proceed, not until the truth is brought to light." The pastor froze and could only nod. The woman quietly left, exiting through a small passage at the back of the church, one known only to those familiar with the sanctuary. When he followed to check, the path was completely empty. The atmosphere dimmed slightly. Her words, though brief, had planted a seed of doubt deep within the heart of the aging pastor. After the morning encounter with the mysterious woman, Pastor Kwame's mind was no longer at ease. Though he said nothing to anyone, his gaze throughout the wedding preparations grew sharper, more scrutinizing. Her warning echoed in his thoughts, "False light, the truth has yet to be revealed." Kofi stepped into the aisle to the lively beat of drums and cheerful cheers. He wore a traditional white agbada embroidered with golden trim. Everyone admired his handsome and composed appearance, the man soon to become the husband of the village's most beloved daughter. But to Pastor Kwame there was something strained about that smile. Kofi's eyes, while still reflecting confidence, kept darting around as if anticipating something, or hiding from it. Mr. Okoro, Amina's father, stood solemnly near the altar. He was a seasoned man, known for his stern nature and realism. His wealth didn't just come from trading timber and livestock, but from his keen sense of investment and sharp judgment of character. Since that morning, after the pastor whispered a few words about the mysterious woman, Mr. Okoro had kept a quiet watch on his future son-in-law. Every gesture, every glance Kofi made was observed. Nothing escaped his trained eyes. In the bridal chamber, Amina wore her pristine white gown, surrounded by her sisters and friends helping her get ready. Her face radiated joy, her eyes sparkling like gemstones. She had no idea about the quiet unease seeping into the atmosphere of the ceremony. To her, everything was built on trust. She believed in the love she and Kofi had nurtured, believed in the gentle whispers and the promise to build a future together. Inside the church, the villagers sat neatly in rows, the air filled with excitement and anticipation. Yet some of the more experienced eyes began shifting subtly toward the pastor. A few elders exchanged faint nods when they noticed Pastor Kwame repeatedly glancing at Kofi from the altar. They too sensed something had shifted in the air, an undefinable presence that urged caution. The wooden bell rang, signaling that the bride was ready. As Amina walked down the aisle with her father, Merchant Okoro, the entire congregation stood. The drums slowed into a solemn, reverent rhythm. But while all eyes turned toward the beautiful bride, Pastor Kwame once again looked over at Kofi. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that instant the pastor saw the one thing he feared most. a flicker of panic in the eyes of the man who was about to vow his life before God. That moment, he knew. The warning had not been given in vain, and he must act, even if it meant interrupting the grandest wedding Bongo Village had seen in years. When Amina reached the altar, the couple turned to face the pastor. He began in a solemn tone, his voice steady and warm. Marriage is a sacred union, where two souls become one. Before God, this community, and your families, we now begin this ceremony. He turned to the groom. Kofi Mensah, do you take Amina Okoro to be your wife, to love, protect, and remain faithful to her for the rest of your life? A brief silence. Kofi swallowed hard, his eyes shifting. Those seated near the front began to murmur when they noticed his hesitation. Pastor Kwame furrowed his brow. Kofi, he repeated gently, more a reminder than a question. At that moment, the church door creaked softly. Every head turned to the back. A lone figure appeared. It was the woman in the gray cloak, her head covered tightly with fabric, the same one who had come to pray that morning. She stood motionless at the back of the aisle. Under the dim light, her eyes seemed to flash coldly. Her voice rang out clear, firm, but not loud. Please forgive me, but I cannot stay silent. This man is not who you believe he is. A ripple of shock spread across the congregation. Whispering filled the room, then quickly fell silent in anticipation. Merchant Okoro spun around, his gaze sharp as a blade. Amina stood frozen, staring at the strange woman. No one recognized her, a complete outsider in the midst of a sacred ceremony, daring to say what no one would ever expect. Pastor Kwame stepped down a few steps, approaching her. Who are you, and what do you mean by that? The woman didn't flinch. She spoke again, slowly and with conviction. I know the truth about that man's identity, and if you allow this wedding to go on, everyone here will regret it. The air turned icy. Every sound seemed to disappear. Even the midday heat couldn't ease the tension that gripped the church. Kofi lowered his head, his whole body drawn tight like a stretched wire. His hands began to tremble. Amina took a step back, her eyes still locked on the man she loved, who now seemed like a stranger. Pastor Kwame glanced at Merchant Okoro. He gave a subtle nod, a silent signal. The powerful man said nothing, but his eyes commanded the entire congregation to stay silent. The pastor returned to the altar, placed his hand on the Bible, and looked up with a gaze more serious than ever. He spoke in a firm, steady voice. We must uncover the truth before we proceed. And just like that, the most anticipated wedding in the region came to a sudden halt. A secret was about to surface. A love was about to be tested by the harshest of truths. The moments following the woman's interruption passed in utter tension. No one dared to breathe too loudly. No one spoke a word. Every eye in the church turned toward Pastor Kwame and the groom, Kofi. They were no longer waiting for a marriage vow, but for the truth. Pastor Kwame looked directly at Kofi, his gaze sharp, as if trying to pierce through the cracks in the young man's facade. Kofi, if you have something to say, now is the time, he said, his voice calm but resolute. Kofi didn't respond right away. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes as if summoning courage. When he opened them, they no longer wavered. He turned toward Amina, who stood frozen, as if turned to stone. You deserve to know the truth, Kofi said, his voice choked. I'm not Kofi Mensah, at least not the person everyone believes I am. A wave of gasps spread through the congregation, only to be quickly silenced by the razor-sharp glare of Merchant Okoro. He clenched his fists but said nothing. Amina looked as if she couldn't breathe. Her eyes widened, her lips trembled. My real name is Kwesi, the young man confessed. Kofi, the real Kofi, was my best friend when we worked together in the city. He and Amina knew each other through letters, introduced by a mutual friend. They had never met in person, only exchanged letters over the course of 2 years. Whispers rose again. Some people covered their mouths in shock. Others exchanged glances, shaking their heads. Kwesi continued, his voice growing more emotional with each word. When Kofi died in an accident, I was completely lost. My father was seriously ill, and my younger sister needed surgery. My family had nothing left. Then I remembered the letters Kofi had shown me, about this beautiful village, about a kind girl named Amina, and about a wealthy father who might change someone's life if he believed in them. Pastor Kwame closed his eyes and sighed deeply. I came to this village using Kofi's name, Kwesi admitted. I thought if I could just earn a little trust, I could save my family, but I never expected to fall in love with you for real." A single tear slid down Amina's cheek. She said nothing. Her hand gripped the wedding bouquet, now almost entirely wilted. The mysterious woman, now unveiled, stood in silence. She was Kofi's older sister. She had come to the village after months of searching for her brother's whereabouts and discovering someone had stolen his identity. She hadn't come for revenge, but to reveal the truth. Merchant Okoro clenched his jaw. He stepped forward, but then stopped. He looked at Amina, saying nothing, then turned toward the pastor. Kwame gave a solemn nod and spoke on everyone's behalf. "This ceremony cannot go on. The truth has been revealed. Now is the time for each of us to decide what comes next." The church fell completely silent. A love built on deception, yet perhaps also the beginning of a sincere redemption. And those standing at this crossroads now had to choose the path their hearts would follow. The wedding ceremony had been halted, but its echoes still lingered in the air. When Pastor Kwame announced the suspension of the ritual, no one objected. Everyone understood. What had just been revealed had changed the entire essence of the event. The first to move from her place was Amina. She slowly made her way to a pew, guided by a close friend. At some point, her wedding bouquet had slipped from her hands, scattering its white petals across the dirt floor. She didn't cry. Her eyes were vacant, as if her mind had drifted somewhere far away. Kwesi remained in place. Everything that needed to be said had already been spoken, and now he could only stand there and accept the consequences. But what moved many in the church was that he did not try to flee. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't try to explain further. He simply stood there, like a sinner awaiting judgment. Merchant Okoro approached the pastor, his voice hoarse from holding back emotion. "I need a few moments alone with my daughter." Pastor Kwame nodded. Then he turned to the congregation. "Today's ceremony will now come to an end. Please leave in an orderly manner." One by one, the villagers exited the church. No one shouted, no one scolded. That silence was more haunting than any words of anger. It was the mark of a community witnessing something that had never happened before. Outside, the wind began to pick up. Red almond leaves fluttered down, swirling with the fine dust from the village road. In a small courtyard behind the church, Amina sat on a stone bench, her father standing beside her. He didn't speak right away. He simply placed his hand on her shoulder, a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready," he said in a deep voice. "I just want you to remember, no matter what happens, you'll always be the one I trust the most." Amina gave a slight nod. After a moment, she spoke. "I don't know what hurts more, being lied to, or the fact that my heart doesn't hate him." That one sentence made the wealthy father pause. He wasn't a man easily swayed by emotion, but this time, he understood. His daughter had truly fallen in love with that man, despite everything. Kwesi stood at a distance, watching the father and daughter. He didn't move closer, but when Amina looked up, their eyes met. There was no more fear. Just a quiet understanding between two people who once believed fate had brought them together, even if through the most wrongful means. Pastor Kwame stood afar, his hand resting on the Bible. Silently, he prayed for them all. And he knew that today was not an ending. It was the beginning of a difficult choice, to forgive or to let go. The wind swept through the white curtain still hanging at the church door. The ceremony had ended, but their story was far from over. A few weeks passed after the failed wedding. Bongo Village slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the memory of that day still quietly lingered in people's hearts, like a sorrowful tune that refused to end. Amina continued to follow news of Kwesi in silence. Through an old acquaintance in town, she quietly sent money to the lumber mill where Kwesi was working, without a name, without a trace. The money was passed along to his family to cover medical bills and treatment. To her, it wasn't an act of lingering love, but a sense of responsibility towards someone who had once truly repented. Amina appeared less in public than before. She spent most of her time at the village clinic, tending to the sick and teaching the children. Her eyes no longer sparkled the way they once did, but within them was a deeper, more mature light, as if all the pain had transformed into understanding. Merchant Okoro also changed. He no longer showed the same harshness whenever Kwesi was mentioned, though he never spoke the man's name. But over time, he came to understand. True love could not be measured by bloodlines, social status, or identity, but by what remained after the truth had come to light. As for Kwesi, he left the village that same day. He gave no goodbyes, left no address. All people knew was that he went south, to a small town where a lumber mill was hiring. He carried nothing with him but regret, and the determination to rebuild an honest life. One afternoon at the end of the rainy season, Amina received a letter with no sender's name. Inside were a few simple lines written in a familiar hand. I had no right to love you through a lie, but I still hope you find happiness, because you deserve it more than anyone. If one day fate allows me to stand before you as myself, I won't say a word. I'll only bow and thank you for once believing in me. Amina folded the letter and placed it inside the book she always carried with her. No one knew what she was thinking as she sat beneath the old baobab tree at the edge of the village, the place where she and Kofi had first spoken. But anyone who saw her could tell. There was no bitterness in her eyes, only softness and hope. Their love story didn't have a fairy tale ending. But sometimes, what has been broken becomes the soil for something new to grow. From the ashes of deception, perhaps, one day, a seed of forgiveness will take root. What do you think about Amina's choice? Could you forgive the way she did? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button if you found this story captivating, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more heartfelt tales and meaningful life lessons. Amina will be back by the fire to share more stories with you. See you next time.